all manipulations that we know of eventually end. Does that guarantee this one will? No, it doesn't. I mean, I get a lot of emails and have for years that, these guys have got it and they're never going to give up, and you may as well give up because it'll never end. And I have to say that possibility exists, but it's highly doubtful that it will last very long. In fact, especially now when you see what's happened over the last 3 months or so, where the SLV changed its prospectus and talked about possible shortages of silver, or maybe I don't want to use the wrong word. There's so many critics out there. I think they used that word, but implied it anyway. And then there was the SIVR, which is the Aberdeen Trust, which is smaller than the SLV, but they were talking about, these nasty speculators. Nasty is my word, not theirs. But so there was some congestion, even at the higher levels at the LBMA, that made it public by publishing this information. So yes, I do think it will end. How? I don't know exactly. Will it be the Comex that defaults? Really technically don't default, because in the contract it says they can settle in cash. So if you go into the Supreme Court and get that high, not that it ever would, and argue that you were defaulted upon, you weren't able to deliver your silver off the contracts that were fully paid for, the Supreme Court would say, well, read the contract. It says you could settle in cash, and they did. You don't have a case. So again, it'd never get that far. I'm just trying to maybe a bit of hyperbole. Maybe I am exaggerating somewhat to make the point. So technically the Comex can't fail, although for all practical purposes, if they failed to deliver silver, especially if it was either another bank or let's say an end user, which very few, if any, end users take silver off the Comex, although it could happen. I mean, you're not going to see Apple Computer taking silver off the Comex unless it's the place of last resort. I mean, if you see that happen, you know the end is nigh, because it goes again from the refiner direct or from a distributor or a dealer, an intermediary that has access to the refiners. So we would, I think, enough pressure. I think it's going to be what I call a natural corner, or a natural end of the manipulation. And it naturally comes about based on fear. And I don't like to say that, but a lot of people in the industry sell silver and gold based on fear. And the fear is fear of failure. And the fear of failure is fear of failure of the fiat currency. Fear of failure that the dollar will buy you tomorrow what it buys you today. And you fear that it won't, because food prices are going up 30% every 2 months. And you fear whether or not you'll be able to feed your family. So any savings that you have, you buy more food, you store it, and you also have some extra savings, so you put it into something like silver. Talk to somebody in Venezuela that has the ability to have savings. And yeah, I'm sure they went in the crypto market. I have no little doubt of that, but many went in the silver market as well. If you go back to Argentina seems to have a currency crisis about every decade. But there's a film called the Empty ATM that was PBS. I don't think it's available anymore. I used to actually have a link to it on one of my websites. But anyway, a lot of the open air markets that pop up almost instantaneous after a currency collapse in Argentina, a lot of the transactions take place for silver rings, silver bracelets, silver necklaces, silver coins. Because it is a means of readily acceptable transfer of payments that can be used for some other transaction. I mean, trading an apple for a book is fine, but if you trade it for silver, usually you can use that silver for any transaction. That's what money's really all about. Keith Weiner, who does monetary metals, he's a friend. I don't agree with him on everything. Very smart guy. Very straight shooter. He wrote an article about the silver squeeze. In fact, I think he wrote multiple ones. I read one and put it on my Twitter feed. And he basically made the analogy, which I think was a good analogy. He said, going to a Starbucks and having a certain latte and with a certain, coffee and having the price go up substantially, and then extrapolating from that coffee, at the restaurant or at the coffee shop, extrapolating that there's a shortage in coffee beans is ridiculous. So he's making the analogy that having a true shortage and huge premiums, and obviously true that there is a squeeze in the retail silver market, but to extrapolate that into what the silver market is, which is 1,000 ounce commercial bar forms traded between industry and or bullion banks for the most part, is a real stretch. You can't go from coffee in Starbucks to the coffee market, or can you go from a retail dealer in the United States charging a $10 premium for an American Eagle into the silver wholesale market? So I have to agree with that. Now, the question was, how much would it take for that silver market to manifest into a real, let's get serious about what the true price of silver is. And I would say 100 million ounces.
Okay. Yeah.
So right now, I haven't looked lately. I look about once or twice a week. What is the registered category in the Comex? And I think it's still above 100 million ounces. And of course, there's more silver than the Comex. Comex is basically a showroom. Not as much silver transfers in and out. It transfers title all the time, but it doesn't transfer in and out of the warehouses as much as a lot of people believe. And but that would be my number. 100 million ounces, I think, as a minimum would be enough, which sounds like a lot to you and me. I mean, I don't have enough to write a check for 100 million ounces of silver. But in the greater scheme of things, it's ridiculously small. I can go back to the early part of our conversation when if we were in 1920 instead of 1921 instead of 2021, if you didn't have silver, you didn't have any money. It doesn't say, are you an industrial buyer? Are you a retail buyer? Are you a wholesale buyer? Are you an investment fund? It really doesn't know, right? So any demand, and I want your feedback, and sorry for interrupting, but let's just say that the wholesale market for silver was kilo bars instead of 1,000 ounce bars. Think about that as a thought experiment. Now we would have a different market, in my strong opinion, because a kilo is a very worthwhile investment for a small investor, 1 kilo. For a big investor, 10 kilos or 100 kilos or 1,000 kilos. But since the retail market revolves around primarily 1 ounce coins, 1 ounce medallions, 1 ounce wafers, 10 ounce bars, and 100 ounce bars, and some kilo bars,